My favorite Pokemon type is Steel, and that's because Steel is the best defensive type in the game. I really don't know what they were thinking when they designed this type, but yeah, it has pretty ridiculous resistances with only a couple of weaknesses. And the thing is, I've been going through a bunch of different Pokemon types and trying to figure out what the best Pokemon of all time is from each type, at least competitively. So I figured, yeah, like maybe I should do Steel. I mean, it is my favorite type after all, right? This was the hardest video in the series to make thus far, and to be honest, I think it'll probably be the hardest one that I have to make, even including the future types. I had to go much more in the weeds with my research in order to make the distinctions, and the reason is because there are so many good Steel type Pokemon. Even deciding on the 10 best Steel types was incredibly difficult, and I had to leave off some all-time great Steel type Pokemon. With that being said, I did a lot of research and I feel really confident about this top 10 list, so let's just jump right into it, starting with a personal favorite Pokemon of mine, Bronzong. Bronzong is a Steel and Psychic type Pokemon with the ability Levitate, making it immune to ground type moves. That's a big deal because Steel has so many resistances and only a couple weaknesses, and ground is one of those. You do get a couple extra weaknesses by being a Psychic type, but overall the type helps more than it hurts because Psychic is offering quite a few things in exchange. What you have to keep in mind about Bronzong is that it's a very tanky, bulky Steel type Pokemon with a lot of really useful utility moves. The move that almost all Bronzong run is Trick Room, which is one of the best moves in competitive Pokemon because it causes slower Pokemon to move before faster ones. If you're going up against a really fast and powerful threat, you don't necessarily need to use something fast of your own if you have access to Trick Room. Bronzong has a lot of other useful tools as well. The year that Bronzong was best was in 2016, where its Steel typing allowed it to work against Xerneas, even more so because it's able to use the move Gyro Ball, which does more damage depending on how much slower the user is than the target. So Xerneas would like double its speed. It's weak to Steel because it is a Fairy type Pokemon, and then Bronzong, who's very slow, would have a really powerful Gyro Ball despite not being a super offensive Pokemon. Even once Trick Room is up though, Bronzong can do a number of useful things. Back in 2016, powerful legendary Pokemon were legal, and so it was somewhat common to pair Bronzong with Groudon and use the move Gravity to make sure that its powerful ground type attack Precipice Blades never missed. And then once Gravity was up, Bronzong could use Hypnosis, which normally misses 40% of the time, but under Gravity, which raises accuracy, yeah, like never misses. It was a really dangerous combo. One move that I'm really partial to is Skill Swap, which switches Bronzong's ability with its target. In this case, you could use it with either Primal Groudon or Primal Kyogre. The way the Primal abilities worked basically is that whichever Pokemon hit the field most recently got their weather up, and the other one would normally have to switch out. But if you use Skill Swap, it would reactivate the abilities without needing you to switch out, and you could give away the useful Levitate ability to your partner Pokemon. So you could have like a Primal Groudon that's immune to ground type attacks, which is really scary, or a Primal Kyogre, which is immune to ground type attacks and fire type attacks in the strong rain. And so it was a really dangerous combo. Bronzong is epic, and so is this week's channel partner. You're not gonna believe this. The Epic Game Store has Genshin Impact available for download for free. Genshin Impact is an open world action RPG available on a variety of platforms. Damn, boy! Allowing users to cross-play with their friends. The game just released its massive version 5.0 update, welcoming players to the brand new Natlan region where they can meet exciting new characters. Mualani is a 5-star Hydro character from Natlan who can use her Sharky surfboard as a mount and in combat. You'll also be able to meet Kinich, a 5-star Dendro character who's accompanied by Kuhul Aja, the self-proclaimed mighty Dragon Lord. I wish I was a mighty Dragon Lord. Genshin Impact's version 5.0 update also features a ton of free goodies to celebrate the game's 4th anniversary, including a bunch of free pulls and a free 5-star character of your choice. You'll also be able to jump into the action in Natlan way sooner, as you can unlock the brand new Arkan quest as soon as you finish the Liu region's main storyline. You can download Genshin Impact through the Epic Game Store at the link in the description and earn 5% Epic rewards on all purchases. You can use the code EPICGENSHIN2024 to receive a ton of free items. Thanks again to Epic Games for sponsoring this video. I don't know why I'm doing so many finger guns today. Bronzong won the World Championships one time when I used it to win paired with Primal Kyogre and Mega Rayquaza. Bronzong was not only helpful against Xerneas and Groudon, which were Pokemon that you should be very grateful if you've never had to play against. But it was also really good against Smeargle, who was able to put entire teams to sleep with its, I'm going to call it a signature move, Dark Void. Darkrai is never legal in the official competitive Pokemon format, so effectively Dark Void was Smeargle's signature move. Anyway, Smeargle would just put your whole team to sleep, but with Lumberry Bronzong, with Trick Room and Safeguard, which stops all incoming status conditions, Bronzong was actually really effective at shutting down Smeargle. The reason Bronzong's not higher in this list is because, well, there's a lot of really good Steel-type Pokemon, but also the fact that it was kind of only great in that 1 year in 2016. Don't get me wrong, it has been used other times, like in 2019 when Xerneas came back, a little bit in Sword and Shield, and maybe early Scarlet and Violet as well, as like an iron defense body press user, kind of the super tanky Pokemon that tries to set up, make itself really bulky, and then, yeah, do a ton of damage. But it was only ever really great in 2016, and so it's not a knock on Bronzong. Like, I'm not saying anything bad about it at all. It's just that there's a lot of good Pokemon on this list, including our number 9 slot, Excadrill. Excadrill is actually really interesting as a Steel-type Pokemon because it functions as more of an offensive Pokemon than a defensive one. And because Steel has such great defensive relationships, normally Steel-type Pokemon tend to either be fully defensive and supportive like Bronzong, or more of a mixed attacker where they're very bulky, but they also can output good damage. Excadrill is kind of the exception to the rule here, where it's not super tanky, and that's because it typically tries to be very fast and very strong using its ability Sand Rush. Sand Rush will double Excadrill's speed if the sand weather condition is up, and with doubled speed, it will basically outspeed every Pokemon in the game. On top of being blistering fast, Excadrill is actually really scary because as a ground type, it's able to hit Pokemon for a lot of good damage. Ground and Steel is also like pretty decent defensive typing. You get 2 immunities to Electric and Poison, plus Steel again has a ton of resistances, and Ground doesn't have that many weaknesses either, and so like if you don't have a Pokemon to hit Excadrill for super effective damage, you're probably hitting it for not very effective damage instead, and that can be a real pain. Even though Excadrill is pretty straightforward in the way that it's used, like it's normally running Protect, a ground move like Earthquake, Iron Head, and then either a second ground move like High Horsepower, or maybe Swords Dance or Rock Slide. Like, it doesn't have that much variety in the sets that it likes to run. It has been one of the top Pokemon across multiple years in competitive Pokemon. This is partly due to the strength of Tyranitar, who is just an incredible Pokemon, and Excadrill, who doesn't have any typing overlap with Tyranitar, though they do share weaknesses. But Excadrill and Tyranitar could kind of form this Sandstorm duo on teams where even if you didn't have a team fully built around Sandstorm, if you just had these 2 Pokemon, you'd have a very threatening mode. And if your opponent didn't have any way of turning off your sand weather, you just have the fastest Pokemon in the game thanks to Excadrill. Excadrill was a top threat back when it was first introduced in Black and White. It was one of the top Pokemon in 2012 and also was really good in 2013, but it wasn't stuck to its debut generation. Excadrill was one of the top compositions during the X and Y era called Japan Sand, which was a pretty standardized composition that used Tyranitar, Excadrill, Mega Salamence, and a couple other Pokemon like Gastrodon and Rotom Heat to just be a really good balance between offense and defense. And then in Sword and Shield, Excadrill was one of the best Pokemon in the game for a number of reasons, but in part because its max move types of Ground and Steel that it liked to use raised its team's special defense and defense every time it hit something. And so being able to double its HP and then get the defense boost that was relevant to what was going on and in the current battle was really threatening. And again, because it was a Steel type Pokemon, suddenly you could end up with a Pokemon that was designed to be offensive, but just you couldn't get rid of it. And it's actually kind of funny because in Sword and Shield, when Excadrill was one of the top threats in the game, it was often paired with Togekiss, which is funny because Excadrill and Togekiss were actually used a little bit back in 2013 as well. So even though these combo was like 7 years split apart and hadn't been used much in the interim, it all kind of returned together. I just think it's neat. Anyway, it's a really great offensive Pokemon that benefited a lot from the signature mechanics of different generations, but also just really took advantage of its nice offensive typing, good defensive typing, and great ability and good stats, right? It kind of has so much going for it, and yeah, that's the reason why it's been a top threat over multiple years. Which brings us to number 8, which is, I think, one of the coolest Pokemon ever designed, personally, at least from a mechanical standpoint. It's Aegislash. Aegislash? 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 Does that even sound the same or different? I don't know. Anyway, the Sword and Shield Pokemon introduced in Pokemon X and Y is really cool. It has a completely unique mechanic that makes it play just completely unlike anything else we've ever seen. Basically, Aegislash has 2 very different forms that it can change between mid-battle. Both Aegislash are Steel and Ghost typing, and they both have the ability Stance Change, which allows it to switch between its forms, but the stats differ completely. Shield form Aegislash is, as you might expect, extremely tanky and not very strong. It's a Pokemon that is really difficult to remove because of its Steel and Ghost typing being just incredible. Steel and Ghost gives you the most number of immunities it's possible to have on a single Pokemon without factoring in abilities, and it also has a ton of resistances and not that many weaknesses. It helps that Ghost is immune to fighting, which is one of the only types that Steel is weak to. Anyway, the shield form of Aegislash is super tanky. Like, even hitting it with like a Choice Specs Hydreigon Dark Pulse isn't enough to pick up a one-hit KO, at least if you've trained it for it. The weakness of the shield form is that it doesn't really do any damage, but the strength of the shield form is that whenever it attacks, it turns into the blade form. And the blade form has the same stats as the shield form, but the offenses and the defenses are flipped. So the sword form hits incredibly hard because it's a Pokemon that can make use of these incredible base stats, but if the sword form ever takes any damage, then it will probably go down pretty quickly because it's very frail. Like I said, to switch from the shield form to the sword form, you have to just use any damaging move. But if you want to switch back, you have to use the special move King Shield, which is kind of like a Protect, but it's a little bit different. This move is better than Protect in the sense that if any Pokemon makes contact with it, they will have their stats lowered, which is great, but it's worse than Protect because certain status moves can go through it, like Taunt or Spore or Thunder Wave, and a couple other moves as well. All in all, though, it's certainly not a bad move. It just has some counterplay that Protect doesn't have to worry about. The thing that makes Aegislash so good is that it practically has better stats than like Arceus, at least if you always consider it being in the proper form. The defenses are incredible and the offenses are also incredible. Also, since both offensive stats are so good, it works as both a physical and a special attacker. And now it might sound like the only way for Aegislash to really be useful is to expose itself and enter its blade form to do damage, but players figured out that there's actually a lot of use for the shield form as well. Using moves like Substitute and Toxic, which don't do damage, but do apply pressure, doesn't change Aegislash's form. So you aren't even forced to switch to blade form if you want to make an aggressive move. You can actually just click one of these supporting moves and end up really powerful. I think the reason they made Aegislash so strong was because that was the generation that they introduced fairy type Pokemon, and they were probably worried about fairies like running away with the game. But when it was first introduced in X and Y, it was a menace. In just a couple years, Aegislash picked up 5 different national level wins, which is incredible. It was one of the most winning Pokemon out of the first year of X and Y. Now, it is worth noting that because Aegislash was so strong, it did receive a pretty major nerf where both its defensive and offensive stats got lowered in the primary form, like the shield form defenses and the sword form offenses got lowered, and nowadays it's much more rare to see it, but it is still a good Pokemon. If it had kept up the level of dominance that it showed in early X and Y, it would have been undoubtedly one of the best Pokemon period ever, but with the nerfs and with kind of the game's evolution and the fact that it's not even in every single game, it's not higher up. But don't let that fool you. It was without a doubt one of the strongest Pokemon out of X and Y. Our next Pokemon comes from Sun and Moon. I guess it's a Pokemon. Ultra Beasts are Pokemon, right? Stakataka coming in at number 7. I love Stakataka. I think it's a really cool Pokemon, and okay, if I can be honest, it's just really fun to say. Come on, you guys love Stakataka, right? How can you not like Stakataka? Now, just as a quick aside, this is just something that I think is really funny, so I want to share it here. I really like making the dish shakshuka. It's very simple if you're not a great cook, which I'm not. There's like not that many ingredients. It's pretty hard to mess up, like at least from my personal experience. And at the World Championships in 2019, I ran Shuka Berry Stakataka, which is Stakshuka. Wait, what is it called? Shakshuka, Stakshuka? Yeah, like I honestly used them interchangeably to the point where like at one point I was calling Shakshuka Stakshuka and Shuka Berry Stakataka Shakshuka. So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's funny. Anyway, Stakataka is a steel and rock type Pokemon, which is frankly pretty bad typing, but Stakataka makes it work because its stats are incredible. As an Ultra Beast, it has the Beast Boost ability, which we'll get to in a little bit, but basically what you need to know is that Stakataka is one of the most physically defensive Pokemon ever. The reason that steel and rock typing isn't considered great is because you get 2 quadruple weaknesses, which is a real liability, and they're both to somewhat common types in fighting and ground. The thing is that if you don't have a way of hitting Stakataka for these like huge super effective hits, it's going to be really difficult to remove, especially if you have a physical attacker. Stakataka's stats are just incredible, and really the glaring weakness in its stats is its speed stat, except for some reason they gave it the move Trick Room. Trick Room is normally reserved for psychic type Pokemon, but I don't know, maybe because Stakataka is like a house, it has rooms inside of it. I don't really know. Anyway, Trick Room is a huge benefit on Stakataka because it's so slow. It's one of the slowest Pokemon ever that's been good, that it suddenly becomes the fastest Pokemon in Trick Room. Stakataka also can use Gyro Ball, and it's even slower than Bronzong, meaning this is just a really great consistent steel type move with basically no drawback if you're hitting a Pokemon reasonably faster than you. Stakataka is part of the reason that Bronzong was not used as much in 2019 because there was a new steel type Pokemon with Gyro Ball that you could use. Stakataka also gets access to the move Wide Guard, which is incredible, especially against powerful legendary Pokemon that use spread moves like Groudon, Kyogre, and Xerneas. Now, everything that I'm saying would also be true if Stakataka was pure steel type, but as a rock type, like, yes, you get a couple extra weaknesses, but you also get the ability to hit certain key threats for super effective damage, like Incineroar. In fact, the Stakataka that won the World Championships in 2019 used Rock EMZ as a way to hit Incineroar and probably KO it even through Intimidate. And if you did get a KO, Stakataka's Beast Boost would raise its highest stat, which most of the time was going to be its defense. If you wanted to get an attack boost from Beast Boost, you would have to lower your defense stat intentionally, which most players didn't want to do. And after a defense boost, Stakataka was even harder to get rid of. Stakataka did see some play outside of the restricted format in 2019, but for the most part, I would say most of its success was concentrated there. But that also has to do with the fact that like it was only introduced in Generation 7 and like it didn't benefit that much from Dynamax because Pokemon were so tanky that like Gyro Ball wasn't that threatening and a whole bunch of other factors that it's not even in Scarlet and Violet right now. I think it's a Pokemon that could win the World Championships again. Before we talk about our next Pokemon, just want to take a second and ask you to subscribe. I'm not going to do a big thing. I'm not going to make this super long. Just know that it helps out the channel a lot. And so if you're enjoying the content you want to support or you want to see more videos like this one, just do me a favor and click subscribe. But our next Pokemon has never won the World Championships. But don't let that fool you. It is an incredibly good Pokemon. Coming in at number 6 is Scizor. Scizor's secondary type is Bug, and Steel is arguably the best type you can pair with Bug because you end up with only one weakness. Bug resists the ground and fighting moves that normally do super effective damage to Steel type Pokemon, and Steel resists the rock, flying. Is that it? All the moves that basically Bug is weak to, except for Fire, in which case they're both weak to it. Part of what's made Scizor so strong over the years is its ability Technician paired with its move pool. Technician makes any move that's weaker than 60 base power 50% stronger, which is a meaningful boost. That's most notable because it also gets the attack Bullet Punch, which is a 40 base power move that, yeah, has priority and hits before most other Pokemon can attack. Pairing Technician and the priority of Bullet Punch with other multipliers that can raise Scizor's attack even further, like Choice Band or Swords Dance, can make it extremely threatening. I actually won the US National Championships back in 2012 with Swords Dance Steel Gem Scizor, Steel Gem being a one-time additional 50% boost. And after a Swords Dance, you could even KO Pokemon like Garchomp, which let me just say, there weren't any Garchomp that were expecting that. Scizor was really great in Black and White's era, and I guess it saw a little bit of play during X and Y as well. But the thing that really surprises me personally is that Scizor actually saw a fair bit of success with its Mega Evolution. Most people didn't consider using Mega Scizor because, like, for the most part, it wasn't worth your Mega slot. Like Mega Scizor and regular Scizor were similar enough. You'd rather have regular Scizor and then something like Mega Kangaskhan or Mega Salamence or Mega Gengar or Mega Charizard or most other, not most other Megas, but a lot of other, like the other better Megas. But some teams either didn't want another Mega or didn't mind running 2 Mega Evolutions or just wanted to use Mega Scizor. And that's part of the reason why Mega Scizor was able to win 2 different international championships, despite the fact that it, again, wasn't considered to be a very good Mega Evolution generally. And it's not like Mega Scizor is the only time that Scizor's seen success. I think I mentioned, like, obviously my own national win, but regular Scizor won 3 or 4 different national level tournaments on its own. It's definitely fallen on harder times in recent years, especially as Incineroar has been added to the game and it's kind of hard for Scizor to do well when Incineroar is back, and just general power creep. But Scizor has such a historic performance over the years. It was so dominant in the early years of competitive Pokemon that it definitely deserves its spot this high up on the list. Which brings us to number 5, another Pokemon with a quadruple weakness to fire, Kartana. Kartana is one of the best Ultra Beasts introduced in Sun and Moon. What you need to know about Kartana is that it's pretty strong, relatively fast, and extremely frail. Its special defense stat is, forgive me, paper thin. It's a grass and steel type Pokemon, which is pretty good. You do have that awful quadruple weakness to fire as well as a weakness to fighting, but you also get a number of useful resistances as well, including water, grass, electric, rock, fairy, steel, dragon. Like, there's a lot of really good types that you're able to resist with grass and steel. Because it's an Ultra Beast, Kartana also has the Beast Boost ability, and it's a bit scarier when Kartana activates it because while Stakataka gets a defense boost, Kartana gets an attack boost, which then leads to more KOs, which then leads to more boosts. That's part of the reason why Kartana was such a good Z-move user back in early Sun and Moon, because if it ever got a KO, it was just off to the races. And it was kind of hard to stop Kartana from getting a KO because normally you would use a steel type Pokemon to deal with a grass and steel type Pokemon since neither type can hit it. But Kartana gets the move Sacred Sword, which is a really great fighting type move, which hits other steel type Pokemon for super effective damage. It also hits some of the main fire type Pokemon, mostly Incineroar and Heatran, who otherwise would be able to threaten Kartana pretty well, but with Sacred Sword, you're actually able to hit them for super effective damage. And I think what's most interesting about Kartana is despite the fact that the special defense stat is so low, players found ways around it. It actually was pretty common because Kartana has such high natural base attack stat to train it to be really specially bulky and try to use moves like Substitute to help extend your longevity on the field. There was even a time where players would run defensive items on Kartana like berries that restored HP, which you would normally not run on a Pokemon that's so frail, but thanks to Kartana's great defensive typing, it actually was able to stick around a lot longer than you would like, and it has good physical bulk as well. And if you didn't want to train it to be super specially bulky, you could always use the Focus Sash item, which ensured that it would stay alive for a single turn, or the Assault Vest item, which raises its special defense by 50%. It's still not going to be able to live a powerful fire type move, but kind of the more stray, neutral, or even resisted special attacks could suddenly be a lot less effective at chipping down Kartana if its special bulk was higher. And it wasn't like Sun and Moon was the only time that Kartana was good. It also had a lot of success in Sword and Shield as a Dynamax Pokemon. With Max Airstream, it was able to raise its team speed, Max Steel Spike made its team even tankier, and Max Overgrowth could give it a damage boost and a little bit of healing by setting up grassy terrain. And of course, you could always use Sacred Sword's Max Knuckle to give it an attack boost as well. Probably the most surprising thing about Kartana, at least I was surprised when I was doing research for this video, is that it has only ever won a single national or international championship. It was one of the most dominant Pokemon out of Sun and Moon, but it just always ended up getting second place. The same is kind of true in Sword and Shield. It got second at an international tournament, but it didn't win the whole thing. That being said, Kartana did win the World Championships back in 2018, which I'm personally relieved about, because if a Pokemon as good as Kartana can't win the World Championships or like many national championships, then I don't even want to know what's going on. That's probably partially Incineroar's fault. I'll say it. I think if Incineroar wasn't in the game, I think Kartana would have more wins. So if you're a huge Kartana fan, go ahead and write Game Freak a letter about Incineroar, okay? But talking about Kartana kind of made me want to talk about the last Ultra Beast on our list, Celesteela. There aren't that many Ultra Beasts, but like a lot of them seem to have been Steel type, at least, or maybe it's just that all the Steel type ones were good, whereas for the other types you get like Guzzlord and Blacephalon. Anyway, Celesteela is, I think the best Ultra Beast to come out of Sun and Moon. The best Ultra Beast period, I guess. It's a Steel and Flying type Pokemon that is extremely hard to get rid of, but also exerts a ton of pressure. What you need to understand about Celesteela is that Celesteela, like a couple other Pokemon on our list, is a Steel type that's immune to ground type moves. And Steel complements Flying really nicely because the Rock and Ice type moves that Flying type Pokemon are weak to, Steel type Pokemon resist, resulting in neutral damage. In fact, there are only two types in the game that can hit Celesteela for super effective damage, Fire and Electric. And so if you eliminate the Pokemon on your opponent's team that can use those moves, well, now your Celesteela is going to be super hard to get rid of. Not only is Celesteela extremely tanky, but it also has a way of recovering its HP, Leech Seed. I don't know why a Steel and Flying type Cell Phone Tower is able to use the move Leech Seed, a grass type move, but they gave it to Celesteela. Leech Seed steals the health of whatever Pokemon it hits every single turn until they either switch out or faint. And what's really scary about it is it just does a set percentage of their health. So even if Celesteela can't directly threaten a Pokemon with damage, putting a Leech Seed on them will get rid of them over time. And the effect doesn't even end if Celesteela switches out. If Celesteela switches out, the Leech Seed just goes to whatever Pokemon switched in its place. Even though Celesteela is clearly designed as this like incredible defensive Pokemon, it's actually able to be pretty threatening offensively, in part because, and this is going to sound like a joke, it's really heavy, as in it's the heaviest Pokemon in the game. They maxed out the weight limit on this thing. You could not bring this in a checked bag on a plane. I am positive. Do not try. Trust me. The reason why Celesteela's weight is so relevant is because it gets the move Heavy Slam, which does more damage the heavier Celesteela is relative to the target. And because Celesteela is so heavy, it's pretty much always at maximum base power. In other words, Celesteela has a really strong move with no drawback that it can just click relentlessly. I would bet that there's a lot of people out there that hate Celesteela, specifically people who played during the first year of Sun and Moon's competitive format, because you would often end up in these end games with Celesteela against another Celesteela where neither Celesteela could damage each other, and they were just like all healing from leftovers and Leech Seed, and the game would always go to timer, and it really sucked. I'm sure commentators in particular have some nightmares about having to cast Celesteela versus Celesteela where they're using Heavy Slam against each other, and because of the same weight, it's not doing any damage. It was an unfortunate time to be a caster, in my opinion. But Celesteela did have some options around this. It gets the move Flamethrower, which you could use to hit other Celesteela, as well as other Steel-type Pokemon that resist Heavy Slam, and Kartana, who's immune to both Leech Seed and, it's so physically bulky that it doesn't take that much from Heavy Slam. Celesteela was really dominant during the first year of Sun and Moon, and I would say to a certain extent the second year of Sun and Moon as well. But in the third year of Sun and Moon in 2019, they added restricted Pokemon back in, and Celesteela was thought to be not quite as good. And then I used it to win the North American International Championships. I leaned into Celesteela's offenses a bit more and used it to threaten Xerneas, as well as just like taking advantage of the fact that Heavy Slam was doing great damage across the board. I brought it to almost every single match that tournament, and I made use of another tool that Celesteela has, Wide Guard. Talked about Wide Guard earlier, but it's really good, like I said, at shutting down certain opposing restricted Pokemon. And if you paired Wide Guard with Primal Kyogre, you could basically shut down all of Groudon's moves, because Groudon's ground type moves were Spread, Precipice Blaze, and were blocked by Wide Guard, and its fire type moves don't work in the strong rain, harsh rain, in the Primordial Sea. Wide Guard was useful against other Pokemon as well, but yeah, Celesteela actually ended up being a really good one Pokemon counter to Groudon and Xerneas, which was one of the top archetypes at the time. Celesteela is not currently in Scarlet and Violet, which I think is for the best, because a Celesteela that can change its type is just completely terrifying. So now we're into our top 3 best steel type Pokemon of all time. And I have a feeling that our number 3 slot might get me some angry comments, but I'll tell you the reasoning for it. So before you write something angry at me, wait a second and see what I have to say. Okay, promise? Okay, number 3 is Zacian. I want to be clear that Zacian is extremely strong. To catch everybody up who was not traumatized during Sword and Shield, Zacian was only legal for basically half of a year. It falls under the category of restricted legendary Pokemon, which are only legal under very specific rule sets, but that did not stop Zacian from winning almost every single event that it was legal for. Zacian is a Steel and Fairy type Pokemon, which is, in my opinion, the best in the game. You basically pair the best defensive type in the game with the best offensive type in the game, and it ends up being very threatening. On top of that, Zacian just has some of the best stats of any Pokemon ever, especially in Sword and Shield before it was nerfed. Spoiler alert. Its ability gives it an attack stat every single time it switches in, meaning it's functionally 50% stronger than Pokemon like Primal Groudon and Mega Rayquaza. Its signature move, Behemoth Blade, is a 100 base power move with no drawback that does double damage if the opponent is Dynamaxed. And its only real weakness is the fact that Steel and Fairy can't hit opposing Steel type Pokemon, but Game Freak gave it the move Sacred Sword, which is a fighting type move that's really good that Kartana also learns that hits opposing Steel type Pokemon and Incineroar. Zacian was the most used restricted Pokemon throughout the year that it was legal in Sword and Shield, and it ended up winning the World Championships as well as being used on a vast majority of teams. It was the second most used Pokemon in the entire tournament, behind only Incineroar, who is not a restricted Pokemon. For a restricted Pokemon to be this dominant is ridiculous and should show you how strong Zacian is. Technically, it has a 100% world's win rate in the formats that it was legal for. The reason that it's not higher is a couple fold. First and foremost, Zacian has been nerfed, and in the most recent competitive format, Zacian is like not doing nearly as well. It's not that it's bad or unusable, but it's, I would say, probably not in the top 7 best restricted Pokemon. Like it's probably between number 8 and 10, which is a huge drop off for the once king of the game. Not only were its stats nerfed, but Behemoth Blade no longer does double damage to Dynamax Pokemon because there are no Dynamax Pokemon left anymore, and its ability now only activates once per battle, which is actually a huge liability and makes opposing counterplay a lot simpler. Also, these lists are intended to be best of all time, and so a Pokemon that's only ever been good in one format or only ever great in one format, I actually tend to value a little bit lower, but Zacian was just so dominant that I couldn't justify putting it outside of the top 3. If I end up eating my words and Zacian does a lot better this year, then I think that that would serve as a point to put it at number 2 or number 1, but with how things currently stand as I record this in the end of June, I think that I can't justify putting it any higher because a season of brilliance does not equate to a lifetime of greatness. Speaking of which, let's talk about our number 2 best steel type Pokemon of all time, Metagross. Metagross has longevity. Metagross has a career. Metagross has been good in so many different formats, using so many different sets with so many different mechanical changes. It still ends up being great. Metagross was one of the top Pokemon back when I first started playing competitively back in Pokemon Black and White, and actually won the World Championships in 2012. It's a Steel and Psychic type Pokemon like Bronzong, and although its ability doesn't give it that nice immunity to ground type moves, it does prevent all of Metagross's stats from being lowered, which is incredibly valuable on a physical attacker. Metagross's clear body ability is just really great. It mostly works to stop attack drops, but speed drops and defense and special defense drops are also blocked as well. Metagross's stats make it really tanky and also really strong. And although it's not super fast, it does get access to Bullet Punch in a pinch, although it's not as strong as when Scizor uses it. The Metagross that won the World Championships back in 2012 actually took advantage of Swagger, a move that gives a Pokemon a big attack boost and then makes them confused, but Metagross could hold the Lumberry, which could not only block opposing status conditions like burn or sleep or paralysis, which could be a real pain, it could also block the confusion from Swagger, basically doubling Metagross's attack. You wouldn't be able to lower it again, and then yeah, it would just do huge damage. Even though Steel and Psychic aren't great at hitting certain opposing types, like opposing Steel type Pokemon, Metagross gets access to the move Earthquake, which is a really good consistent attack, especially given it was often paired with Cresselia back in the day. After Black and White ended, Metagross was given a Mega Evolution, which played very differently. It was a lot faster and focused more on being a speedy offensive Pokemon with good defensive typing and still good natural bulk, rather than this kind of like super tank that's slow, works under Trick Room, and yeah, like is kind of difficult to ignore, but also difficult to get rid of. Mega Metagross actually had a lot of success. Although it never won the World Championships, it did get to the semifinals twice, which is a big accomplishment. And it won 3 different international level tournaments, which again is the second highest level behind the World Championships. I think part of the reason that Metagross works so well and part of the reason it's been so good is because the best offensive type in the game for a while was Dragon and then was Fairy, and Steel resists both of those moves. But even if you resist them, some of these powerful attacks are just so strong that even resisting them doesn't help you all that much. And so what was nice is that Metagross was so tanky that it could actually work as a reliable counter where you could switch in, take a Draco Meteor, you'd still take some damage, but like you'd take it better than anything else on your team, and then they'd be at -2 special attack, and you like would have gotten through sometimes the Dragon Gem or whatever, and then you could actually threaten a lot of damage back because Metagross was offensive enough to still be threatening. Metagross is also cool because it's used a number of different items over the years. Like in Sword and Shield, sometimes it would run like the Assault Vest to be really tanky as a Dynamax attacker. In Sun and Moon, people ran Weakness Policy. We've seen Life Orb, we've seen Lumberry, we've seen Choice Band, we've seen Normal Gem Explosion. Like there's a lot of different things you can do with Metagross, and it's a Pokemon that's really versatile as well. It can work outside of Trick Room, it can work in Trick Room. I think I tried Rock Polish Metagross or Agility Metagross at one point. I liked it. It wasn't very good. I think something that I'll be interested to see is if Mega Evolution comes back, how good Metagross is, because it has some stuff going for it at the end of the day. Like it can't be intimidated until it Mega Evolves. It hits Fairy type Pokemon for super effective damage, which is extremely valuable. It resists the normal and flying type moves from Kangaskhan and Salamence. It can KO Mega Gengar in a single hit, though the reverse might also be true. I think it's a really cool Pokemon. It's had incredible longevity. It's been good in every single generation. Generation 4, 5, 6, 7, and kind of 8. Generation 9 is like the first time where it hasn't been especially good, but yeah, I still think that given how good it's been over the years, Metagross deserves its spot at number 2 of the best steel type Pokemon of all time, which only leaves number 1, which unless I've missed, let me double check this. Sorry, quick correction. Metagross actually also won the World Championships in 2008. So it has 2 World Championship wins under its belt. So that only leaves us with the number 1 best steel type Pokemon of all time. Another steel type with 2 wins at the World Championships, Heatran. This is another one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. It's just amazing. Heatran is a fire and steel type Pokemon with the ability Flash Fire, which not only makes it immune to all fire type moves, if it ever gets hit with one, its own fire type attacks become even stronger. Heatran is actually a little like Metagross because it's not super fast, but it's pretty tanky, like actually really respectably tanky, especially with its great defensive typing, and it's great at outputting consistent damage every single turn while being hard to get rid of. Heatran has had some of the most longevity of any Pokemon and competitive Pokemon, period. Heatran was great in 2012 when I used it to get second at the World Championships. It won the World Championships in 2013. It wasn't legal in 2014, and then in 2015 it won the World Championships again as a member of like the dominant archetype called Chalk, Cresselia Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Kangaskhan, normally Thunderous. It had some decent results during Sun and Moon. During Sword and Shield, it wasn't in the game for a while, and then it it was kind of hard to judge because events were like canceled for the majority of the years where Heatran would have been good. And then in Scarlet and Violet, Heatran was added to the game right before the World Championships with no other events that year except for the World Championships, and it placed second, almost winning the entire thing. I think what makes Heatran so good is the fact that it's just so versatile. Let me give you some examples. I got second at the World Championships using Heatran, but I used a really weird set where basically I turned Heatran into a Pokemon with no weaknesses. I used the Chople Berry, which reduces super effective fighting type damage. I paired it with Sunny Day Cresselia to turn off its water weakness. That same Cresselia also had the move Skill Swap, which would give Levitate to Heatran, making it float, making it immune to ground type moves. Those are all of Heatran's weaknesses. This Cresselia and Heatran combo basically carried me through the World Championships and almost resulted in me winning. Then the following year, Heatran was extremely popular, but it was because of a special event only move that you could only get if you played through a mystery gift in Pokemon Ranger that gave you a Manaphy egg, or like it had something to do with Manaphy, I think. Maybe it was a different mystery gift, but basically there was a mystery gift you had to play in Pokemon Ranger where this isn't a joke. You had to draw circles around Pokemon. That was the gameplay of that game. It was actually really fun. I kind of want to replay it. If you got the special event Heatran, it could have the move Eruption, which is one of the best fire type moves of all time. And so Heatran basically was using Fire Gem Eruption that year to do stupid amounts of damage, just like ridiculous amounts of damage. Fire Gem Eruption could often even KO or come close to KOing Pokemon that resisted it. It was so incredibly powerful, especially if the sun was up. Then in 2015, Heatran went back to being more of a standalone defensive role. It was paired with Cresselia, but it wasn't using Skill Swap. It just was used as this Pokemon that could work both inside and outside of Trick Room because of its middling speed stat. And it used its great defensive typing to set up a substitute, and then you'd have to hit it multiple times to get rid of the substitute and another time to like KO it. And so it was just a really difficult Pokemon to remove. And then in Scarlet and Violet, we saw substitute Heatran, but we also saw a more offensive Heatran as well, using moves like Terra Blast and Life Orb to just output tons tons of damage. Heatran gets the coverage move Earth Power, which really shores up its weaknesses. Without it, like Fire and Steel both can't hit opposing fire types, but Earth Power hits them for super effective damage and can also do neutral damage against water type Pokemon that resist fire as well, and dragon type Pokemon to boot. Heatran probably has something to do with the reason why they changed the core ruling, where you were no longer allowed to bring Pokemon from past generations into modern day competitive Pokemon. Like you can have them in the game, but like any event exclusive moves are no longer legal. I have a feeling that Eruption Heatran was part of the decision to make that ruling. Anyway, Heatran is basically just this super consistent, reliable Pokemon that can do so many different things, and it's always going to be useful. Despite the fact that it does have a quadruple weakness, Heatran has never really let that slow it down and has been consistently one of the best Pokemon across multiple years. And that's the reason why I think it deserves its place as the best steel type Pokemon of all time. Also, it's so cute. How can you not like Heatran? It's so cute. Wait, I think I have a little Heatran on my desk somewhere. Where is it? I don't want people to think I'm biased, but I have, can you see it? I have a little Heatran. Somebody gave this to me at a tournament and now it sits on my desk. Anyway, that's the best steel type Pokemon of all time, according to your boy. If you like this video, if you like this format, if you want to see more of it, or you just think this stuff is fun, I actually did a video recently on finding the best ghost type Pokemon of all time, which was similarly difficult. And I think you might like it. You should check it out.